The night sky above the ruined colony was filled with smoke, broken towers, and the silent cries of those who had already been lost. In the shadows of a shattered wall, an alien widow crouched low, holding her small child tightly against her chest. Her heart beat so fast it almost hurt, her eyes darting at every flicker of light, every sound of movement in the dark. The war had taken everything, her husband, her family, her home, and now she had only her child left. She whispered to the little one to stay quiet, but the child's stomach growled loudly from hunger, a sound that pierced the silence like a scream. The widow had heard the stories every alien in the colonies had. They said the humans were meat-eaters, predators who saw small alien children as easy prey. They said humans walked with blood in their hands and hunger in their eyes. The widow believed these stories because she had never seen a human before, and fear always grows when the truth is unknown. That night, under the broken moonlight, she saw him, a tall figure moving through the rubble, broad shoulders, strange armor scratched with battle scars, a weapon hanging at his side. Her blood turned cold. It was a human, and worse. He had seen her. The human stopped just a few feet away, standing so still that the widow thought even the wind had frozen in fear. His face was partly covered, but his eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, strange and sharp like a predator ready to strike. The widow pushed her child behind her, whispering prayers to gods she no longer believed in. Her hands shook, but she lifted a broken piece of metal like a weapon, though she knew it was useless, against him. The child, too young to understand, peeked out from behind her cloak, his big innocent eyes locking on the human. The widow's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment every story had warned her about. The human would lunge forward, tear the child from her arms, and feast as the monsters always did, in whispers and rumors, but instead something happened she did not expect. The human slowly reached into a pack on his side. The widow braced, thinking he would pull out a blade. Instead, he took out food, a small package, a ration bar wrapped in strange human foil. He crouched down, lowering himself until his height was less threatening. The movement was gentle, controlled, almost respectful. And then, he placed the food on the ground between them, sliding it slowly toward her child. The widow's mind screamed at her. This is a trick, it must be a trap. Her child, however, was too hungry to care. Tiny hands reached out, snatched the bar, and bit into it without hesitation. The widow grabbed the child, shaking her head in panic, terrified that the food was poisoned. But when the child's eyes lit up with delight and he ate faster, she froze. The food was real. It was safe. The human had fed her child, not devoured him. Her chest tightened with confusion. The stories had been so clear, so full of terror. But what she saw in front of her was no monster, no devourer. It was a man, tired and scarred, but strangely gentle. Still, fear held her heart in chains. She whispered to herself, "He is just fattening the child, waiting for the right moment." Every rumor, every warning echoed in her head. Her people had always believed that kindness from a human was only a mask before the hunger showed its teeth. The human spoke then, his voice deep but soft. The words were foreign, rough on her ears, yet his tone carried no threat. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, showing he held no weapon. For a long moment their eyes locked, hers full of suspicion and terror, his calm, almost sorrowful. The night stretched endlessly, filled with tension so sharp it could cut through stone. The widow could not understand why this predator had not attacked, why he would give instead of take. Her child tugged at her cloak, whispering in a soft, sleepy voice, "Mama." He helped. Tears burned her eyes, but she shook her head, still trapped between fear and hope. The human finally stood, scanning the ruins around them, as if he too was hunted. He motioned for them to follow, pointing toward a safer path through the debris. The widow's breath quickened. Was this salvation or the road into a predator's den? Her legs trembled as she held her child close, staring at the figure who had been painted as a monster in every tale. Yet here he was, offering food instead of teeth, protection instead of death. Her heart whispered one thing: Her fear shouted, "Another!" And in that fragile moment, under the cold starlight of a broken world, she realized her life would never be the same again. The widow could not sleep that night, even though her child had dozed off in her arms after finally eating. The strange human sat a few steps away from them, his back against a broken wall, staring into the distance like a watchful guardian. She hugged her child tightly, whispering in her heart that she would not let this creature harm him no matter the cost. But her thoughts twisted in confusion. Why had he fed them instead of killing? Why had he given instead of taking? Her people had told her all her life. Humans eat flesh, humans destroy, humans have no soul. And yet here was one, breathing the same cold air, looking almost lonely, as if he too had lost someone. The widow's eyes narrowed, suspicion refusing to fade. Perhaps this was a game for him. Perhaps he enjoyed watching fear in her eyes. Her trembling hands clutched the broken metal shard she had carried since the invasion. A useless weapon, but her only defense. The human moved suddenly, and her heart jumped in her throat. But he only adjusted his pack, pulling out another ration bar, breaking it in half, and placing one half beside her. The smell of food made her child stir awake, his little eyes glowing with hunger. The widow wanted to slap the food away, scream at her child not to touch it, but the boy reached eagerly. He bit into it, smiling with crumbs on his lips, his face glowing with joy she had not seen since before the war. Tears stung her eyes, anger mixing with gratitude. How cruel, she thought, to use food as a chain, to trap her child in trust. But the human made no move, no trick, no attack. He simply watched, his tired eyes softening as the boy chewed. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the child's small giggles. Finally, the widow spoke, her voice low and trembling. Why do you help?" The human looked at her, tilting his head, as if her words were strange sounds he did not understand. He replied in his own tongue, the sounds rough but calm. Though she could not understand the meaning, she felt no threat. In his tone, her people had warned, "Never look into a human's eyes, for there you see hunger." But when her gaze accidentally met his, she saw no hunger, only something she could not name. A quiet sadness, a shadow of loss, maybe even pity. It made her chest tighten, though she forced herself to look away. The child crawled toward the human then, clutching the wrapper of the ration bar. The widow gasped, reaching to pull him back, but the boy moved too fast. He held up the wrapper like an offering, babbling in his childish voice. The human smiled faintly, took the wrapper, and tapped the boy's head gently with his large hand. The widow froze, her heart pounding in fear, but the child only laughed, clapping his hands. She could not understand. How could her son laugh in the presence of a monster? How could his innocence pierce through centuries of fear and war? The widow felt her walls shaking, but she rebuilt them quickly. This is a trick, she told herself again. Humans always take in the end. The night passed slowly, the human never closing his eyes, always scanning the ruins like a protector. At dawn, the sky turned pale, smoke still rising in the distance. The human stood and motioned for her to follow, pointing to the east. The widow shook her head furiously, clutching her child, but the human did not argue. He simply started walking, slowly, waiting for them to decide. Her child tugged at her cloak, whispering, "Mama, safe, please." The words stabbed at her heart, for the child's trust was greater than her fear. She looked around. Broken buildings, burned streets, corpses hidden in the dust. If she stayed, they would die. If she followed, maybe they would die too, but maybe, just maybe, they would live. Her legs moved before her mind could stop them, carrying her and her son a few steps behind the human. Every muscle in her body screamed with tension, ready to run at the first sign of betrayal. The human slowed his pace, making sure not to walk too far ahead. He cleared rubble from their path with strong hands, lifted broken beams so they could pass. Once, when sharp glass threatened to cut the boy's feet, he laid down a piece of metal for the child to step on. The widow's breath caught again. This was not how monsters acted. Hours passed as they moved through the ruins. They heard the sounds of alien soldiers in the distance, hunting survivors. The widow pressed herself against the wall in terror, but the human raised a hand signaling silence. With slow steps, he led them through a hidden alley, shielding them with his own body whenever danger came close. Once, when a soldier's light scanned near them, the human pressed against the wall, so tightly that his shadow covered the widow and her child completely. Her heart pounded in her ears, expecting him to give them up at any second, but he stayed still until the danger passed, his breath slow and controlled. For the first time, doubt entered her heart, not doubt in him as a monster, but doubt in the stories she had always believed. Why would a predator shield its prey? Why would a meat-eater risk his life for a widow and her child? When the sun set again, the human found a small ruined shelter. He placed them inside, giving them the safer spot while he sat at the entrance, guarding like a soldier on duty. The widow sat in silence, her child curled up in her lap. Her heart was a battlefield, fear on one side, hope on the other. She looked at the human's back, broad and silent, a wall between them and the dangers outside. And for the first time she wondered if perhaps the galaxy had been wrong all along. The next morning began with silence, broken only by the soft breathing of the child who still slept in his mother's arms. The widow had barely closed her eyes the whole night, her mind trapped between fear and confusion. The human had not rested either, his figure still sitting at the shelter's entrance, his weapon in his lap, eyes sharp and searching the ruins as if danger could appear at any moment. When the first light of day touched the broken walls, he stood and motioned for her to rise. The widow hesitated, clutching her child closer. She did not trust this human, not fully, not yet. But she also knew the ruins around them were death. Soldiers roamed, beasts lurked in shadows, and hunger waited like a vulture. She whispered to her boy, and together they stepped into the cold daylight, following the stranger who had become their only shield. The human walked with careful steps, always scanning the horizon. Every sound made the widow jump, the crack of rubble under his boots, the rustle of wind through burned banners. She kept her distance, but not too far, afraid that if she strayed even a few steps away, the world would swallow her and her child whole. They passed the remains of houses where laughter once lived. Now only ashes and broken toys lay scattered. The child bent to pick up a small stuffed creature, its fur blackened by fire. The human paused, looking back at the boy, then nodded softly, letting him keep it. The widow's chest tightened. Her son had lost so much, yet here he was clutching a burned toy as if it was treasure. The day grew harsher as the sun climbed, heat rising from the scorched ground. The widow's legs ached, her arms heavy from carrying her child. At one point she stumbled, nearly falling. The human turned instantly, steadying her with one strong hand before she could hit the ground. His touch was brief but steady, and then he stepped back quickly. The widow's heart pounded, not from fear of harm, but from the strange realization that he had caught her instead of letting her fall. Hours passed, and their journey carried them closer to the edge of the colony. But safety was still far, and danger always near. They heard voices, alien soldiers shouting in the distance, searching, hunting. The widow froze, pressing her child into her chest, her eyes wide with panic. The human raised a hand, signaling silence, and guided them into the shadows of a broken building. Inside the ruins, the air smelled of dust and old fire. The widow held her breath as the voices grew closer. The human crouched at the doorway, his weapon ready, his body tense like a predator waiting to strike. But not at them. The soldiers passed just outside, their boots crunching glass, their words sharp and cruel. Her child whimpered, too young to understand the need for silence. The widow's eyes filled with tears, terrified the sound would betray them. But the human turned, placed a finger gently on his lips, and gave the boy a small, reassuring smile. The child nodded, pressing his little hand against his mouth to stay quiet. The soldiers eventually moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Only then did the widow let out the breath she had been holding, her whole body shaking. They walked again once the danger passed, the human always taking the lead, clearing rubble, lifting beams, scanning every corner. The widow noticed something she had not before. He never ate, never drank. He gave everything to them, the rations, the water, the safer places to rest. Her mind spun with questions. but fear kept her lips closed. She could not understand. Why would a predator starve? So his prey could live? As night fell, they found a safer spot under the remains of an old transport station. The human built a small fire, its glow warm against the cold air. The child sat beside him, clutching his toy and staring at the flames with wide eyes. The widow sat opposite, watching both of them, her heart torn in two. Her people's voices echoed in her memory. Humans are monsters. They only protect their own. They will betray you the moment you turn your back, and yet her eyes showed her something else. A soldier who shielded them with his body. A man who had fed her starving child. A protector who had risked his life. In silence, the firelight danced across his face, showing lines of exhaustion, pain, and scars from battles she could not imagine. For the first time, she wondered if maybe he too had lost a family. Maybe he too carried grief as heavy as her own. The child yawned and curled against her, soon falling asleep. The human kept watch, his eyes never leaving the darkness. The widow whispered to herself, "If he wanted to harm us, he could have done it already." Her words trembled in the night air, half confession, half question. She pulled the child closer and looked at the human once more. Her fear still lived, but for the first time, a small flame of doubt flickered. Doubt not of him, but of the lies she had always believed, and so their journey continued. Step by fragile step, a widow, her child, and a man once called a monster, bound not by trust yet, but by something far stronger than fear. The thin hope that maybe, just maybe, kindness could be found where no one expected it. The journey stretched into another day, and the widow felt her strength slipping with every step. Her body ached, her mind was heavy with fear, and her heart carried a weight that words could not hold. But her child was different. He walked with a light in his eyes, clutching the burned toy he had found, smiling even in the ruins. And most of all, he looked up at the human not with fear, but with open curiosity. At first, the widow tried to pull him back, to keep him close, but the boy's little feet always found their way closer to the tall figure leading them. Every time the human slowed to check the path, the child would tug at his cloak, pointing at strange shapes or asking questions in his own tongue. The human did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. He would glance down, sometimes nodding, sometimes showing with his hands what was safe or dangerous. The widow watched in silence, her heart twisting. Why was her son unafraid of the very monster she feared? Later that afternoon, as they crossed a broken marketplace, the boy suddenly laughed. The sound echoed against the empty walls, startling his mother. He was laughing at the human who had tried to clear rubble and slipped slightly on the dust. The boy's laughter rang pure, like a bell in the silence of a ruined world. Even the human turned, blinking in surprise, then let out a small breath that almost sounded like a chuckle. The widow's heart throbbed in confusion. Monsters did not laugh with children, did they? That night, danger came closer. Wild beasts prowled near the edge of the colony, their red eyes glowing in the dark. The widow held her child tightly, her whole body frozen in terror. The human stood tall, his weapon raised, waiting. As the shadows moved closer, then, with a sudden growl, one of the beasts leapt from the darkness, its fangs sharp and shining. Before the widow could even scream, the human stepped forward. One shot rang out, echoing through the ruins. The beast collapsed in the dust, never to rise again. The widow trembled, expecting more beasts to come, but the boy broke free from her grasp and ran toward the human. "No!" she cried, her voice shaking with fear. But the child ran anyway, his small arms wrapping around the soldier's leg. The human froze, lowering his weapon slowly. The child looked up at him with wide eyes and whispered a single word. A thank you. In their alien tongue, the widow's knees nearly gave out. Her son had clung to the arm of the very creature she had sworn to fear. The human reached down, gently patting the boy's head. There was no hunger in his eyes, no cruelty, only a strange softness, a warmth that confused her more than any weapon ever could. The boy laughed again, holding on to the human's hand, as if it were the safest place in the world. The widow felt her throat tighten, her heart caught between horror and hope. Her son's innocence was tearing down the wall she had built her whole life, As they settled that night in a broken building, the boy would not sit beside her. Instead, he crawled next to the human, his small form leaning against the soldier's arm. The widow whispered for him to return, her voice sharp, but the child only shook his head. He curled up like a small animal by the human's side, his toy clutched in one hand. The human adjusted, his position carefully, covering the boy with his own cloak. The widow's eyes burned with tears she could not explain. How could a so-called predator protect her child as tenderly as any father would? Sleep would not come to her. She sat in the corner, staring at them. The child resting peacefully, the human awake and alert, keeping guard as if the boy was his own. She wanted to scream, to tell herself this was all a cruel trick. But the picture before her said something else. It spoke of trust born not from logic but from the purity of a child's heart. The next morning, the boy refused to leave the human's side. He held his hand as they walked, his small fingers gripping the soldier's large gloved ones, the widow's. Fear grew sharper with every step. What if this bond ended in betrayal? What if the boy's trust blinded them both to the danger of a human's true nature? And yet, another part of her heart whispered something she was too afraid to admit. Maybe her son was right. As they walked through a forest on the edge of the colony, the human stopped, crouching low. He pointed to the ground, showing tracks of soldiers passing nearby. The widow's breath caught. They were being hunted. She pulled her child close, but the boy slipped free again, tugging at the human's cloak, whispering something in his sweet voice. The human looked down at him, then nodded. He crouched lower, motioning for silence, his hand gently guiding the child behind cover. The widow's heart broke at the sight. Her son trusted him more than her own words, and for the first time, she did not pull her child away. For the first time, she allowed herself to stand still and watch as the human protected them both. Fear still chained her heart, but innocence had already broken the first lock, and deep inside, though she would not say it yet, she knew her child had seen something she had refused to see. That behind the stories, behind the fear, the human was not a monster. He was something else, a protector, a guardian, maybe even a friend. The widow never thought she would see her own people again. But one afternoon, as the ruined forest opened into a clearing, she saw them, a group of alien survivors, soldiers and refugees gathered together around a broken transport ship. Her heart raced with relief, tears rushing to her eyes. She clutched her child, whispering, "We are saved. We are home." For the first time since the war began, she believed. Hope had returned, but then her relief froze into fear. The moment her people saw the human, their faces twisted with horror and rage. Cries erupted in the crowd. "Monster! Meat-eater! Keep him away!" Several soldiers raised their weapons at once, aiming at the man who had been their shield for days. The widow stepped back instinctively, pulling her child close. Her mind screamed at her to speak, to tell them this human was different, but her tongue was locked by fear. The soldiers surrounded him, shouting curses. One stepped forward, spitting on the ground. "Why bring this beast here? Do you want him to eat your child in front of us all?" The widow shook her head quickly, stammering, No, he did not harm us." But her voice was small, trembling, lost in the noise of hatred. The child tried to run to the human, but she caught him, pressing him to her chest. The human stood still, calm, his hands slightly raised to show he meant no harm, yet his eyes never left the widow's, as if he already knew the storm that was about to fall on her. The leader of the group, an older alien with deep scars across his face, stepped forward. He pointed at the widow, his voice sharp. "You were with him, weren't you? Tell us what he did. Tell us how he tried to devour your child. Speak the truth so we may kill him without mercy." The widow's knees weakened, her breath trembling. This was the moment, the choice she had never wanted to make. Her people demanded hatred, demanded her words to seal the human's fate. But in her heart, she remembered the nights he had stayed awake to protect them, the food he had given, the danger he had shielded them from. Her child wriggled in her arms, crying out, "No, he saved us, he is good." The crowd gasped, some sneering, some shaking their heads. The leader barked, A child does not know truth. You, widow, must decide. Speak, and speak wisely. For if you defend this beast, you betray your people." The widow's heart pounded, so hard she thought it would burst. Her eyes darted to the human, still standing silently, not begging for his life, not defending himself. His gaze was steady, almost sorrowful, as if telling her, "Do not be afraid. Say what you must." She felt torn in two. Loyalty to her people on one side, loyalty to the truth on the other. Her hands shook as she lowered her child to the ground, pushing him gently behind her. The leader's voice cut through the silence again. "Widow, did this human threaten your child? Did he prove himself the monster we have always known them to be?" The crowd leaned closer, their faces eager for her answer. The widow opened her mouth, but no words came at first. Images flashed in her mind. The night he had given food, instead of teeth, the day he had shielded them from soldiers, the moment her son had slept safely under his cloak. Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision. She could lie, and her people would cheer. The human would die, and she would be safe, in their arms. Or she could speak the truth and risk becoming an outcast, maybe even punished for siding with an enemy. Her lips trembled, her breath caught, and then, with a voice louder than she thought she had, she cried, "He is not a monster." The crowd erupted in chaos, shouts of anger mixing with disbelief. The widow's voice broke but grew stronger. "He saved us. He gave us food when we starved, water when we thirsted, shelter when we had none. He fought beasts and soldiers to protect us. He has not eaten my child. He has protected him as a father would." Her child ran forward, clinging to the human's leg, tears in his small eyes. "Don't hurt him. He is our protector." The crowd fell silent for a moment at the child's plea. The widow stood tall, though her body trembled, facing the leader. "You ask me to lie, to call him a monster. I cannot. I saw with my own eyes what he truly is." The leader's face twisted with anger, but also with doubt. Whispers spread through the crowd, some muttering that maybe her words held truth, others insisting it was a trick. The widow stood, her ground, tears streaming down her face, her voice steady now. "You can kill him if you want, but know this. If you do, you destroy the only being who showed mercy when none of us would." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. The widow clutched her child, staring at her people, her heart pounding. She had chosen, and whatever came next would change everything. For her child, and maybe for how her people saw the humans. The crowd's angry whispers had not faded when danger struck. From the trees beyond the clearing came the sharp crack of weapons, a rain of fire cutting through the air. The widow screamed, clutching her child as the survivors scattered in panic. Soldiers of the enemy, those who had destroyed their colony, had tracked them down, their eyes glowing red through the smoke of battle. Chaos erupted. The alien leader shouted orders, but his people were unprepared, weak from hunger and grief. The enemy soldiers advanced, merciless and armed, and in that moment of terror, the widow saw movement, the human stepping forward, placing himself between the attackers and her child. Blaster fire struck around them, shards of rock exploding into dust. The widow pulled her son close, shielding him with her arms, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear. The human moved with precision, his weapon flashing with deadly bursts. Every shot was meant not for his own safety, but to keep the enemy away from the widow and her boy. One soldier lunged forward, blade raised. The widow gasped, certain death had come, but the human intercepted, the blade tearing across his armor. He staggered but did not fall. With a roar, he pushed the attacker back, striking hard and fast, his own blood staining the ground beneath him. The widow's eyes widened, tears blurring her vision. He was fighting, like a shield, not a predator. Each wound he took was not to save himself, but to save them. Her son cried out, "Protector!" Reaching his small hands toward the human, the sound gave her strength she did not know she still had. Another blast rang out. This one struck the human in the side. He collapsed to one knee, his face twisted in pain, his breaths ragged. The widow's scream tore from her throat. "No!" Without thinking, she ran to him, dropping beside his bleeding form. She pressed her hands against the wound, though she had no skill to heal, only desperation. The human's eyes met hers, steady. Even in pain, he whispered words she could not understand, but she felt them in her heart. Stay safe. Protect the child. The enemy soldiers closed in, their shadows stretching over them. The widow clutched the human, shaking her head furiously. No, no, you cannot die. Not after everything. Not after you saved us. Her son pressed against the human's side, sobbing. Please don't leave, please. The sight broke something deep inside her. The very man she had feared as a monster was now bleeding for her child. The leader of her people shouted for retreat, but few could move. Panic consumed them. Yet the human, even half broken, stood. Again blood dripped from his side, but he raised his weapon one last time. With a roar he advanced, drawing fire away from the widow and the boy. His body became the wall between them and death. Shots burned through his armor, his steps heavy, but unyielding. Every second he bought gave the survivors a chance to flee. The widow screamed for him to stop, tears streaming down her face, but he would not turn back. He fought like a man who had nothing left to lose except the fragile lives behind him. Finally, silence fell. The last enemy soldier collapsing to the ground. The clearing stank of smoke and blood, the cries of the wounded filling the air. The human dropped to his knees, his weapon falling from his hands. The widow rushed to him, catching him before he hit the earth. His blood stained her clothes, warm and heavy. Her son clung to his hand, sobbing uncontrollably. The human's breath was shallow, his voice a broken whisper. Though she could not understand his words, she felt their meaning. He had done what he must, and he asked for nothing in return. Her tears fell onto his face, her hands trembling as she begged, Please, please don't leave us. You are not a monster. You are our protector, our family now. The child pressed his small forehead against the human's chest, crying, Stay, stay. The widow held both of them, her heart breaking. She looked up at her people, who stood in stunned silence. They had seen it with their own eyes. The so-called meat-eater bleeding for an alien widow and her child. No story, no rumor, no lie could erase what they had witnessed. The widow's voice shook, but it was louder than ever before. You called him a beast, a devourer. Tell me, is this how monsters act? Does a monster bleed for strangers? Does a monster shield a child with his own life? No one answered, their faces pale, their voices stolen by the truth they could no longer deny. The human's eyes fluttered, his strength slipping. The widow pressed her hand tighter to his wound, whispering desperately, You cannot die. Not now, not after giving us hope. Her child's small voice joined hers, trembling with innocence. Don't go. Please don't go. And in that moment, the human, broken and battered, managed a faint smile. It was not the smile of a monster, but of a man who had found meaning, even in sacrifice. The widow wept, her tears falling freely onto the man she had once feared. She realized then that her heart no longer saw him as an outsider. He was no predator, no enemy. He was their protector, their shield, their proof that kindness existed even in the darkest of wars. The battlefield lay silent after the storm of fire, bodies of enemy soldiers scattered across the clearing. Smoke, curling upward into the gray sky. Among the ruins of chaos, the widow knelt on the ground, her arms around the broken human. Her child pressed against him, refusing to let go. The world felt heavy, yet for the first time it was not fear that weighed on her heart. It was sorrow, deep and sharp. The human's breathing was shallow, every rise of his chest a struggle. Blood stained his armor, his strength fading fast, yet his eyes, dim but steady, stayed on the widow and her child. He did not look at the soldiers who glared, nor at the crowd that whispered. He looked only at them, the ones he had sworn to protect. The widow trembled, pressing her hands harder against his wound, whispering, Stay with us, please. You are not a monster. You are our protector. Her voice cracked with desperation, her tears falling onto his skin. Her son's small hands gripped the man's fingers tightly, crying out, Don't go, you promised, you promised. The human gave a faint smile, as if the boy's words gave him a strength he did not know he still had. The leader of the aliens stepped forward, his voice hard. He cannot be trusted. He is human. Let him die. But the widow rose to her feet, her face wet with tears, yet her eyes fierce. She shouted, Open your eyes. You saw what he did. He bled for us, fought for us, stood as a wall when none of you would. If this is what a monster is, then I would rather have monsters than cowards." Gasps spread through the crowd, whispers rushing like wind through dry grass. The widow's hands shook, but her voice carried with strength she had never known. "We told lies about them, but I have seen the truth. This human saved my child, he saved me, he is no devourer, he is a guardian." Her words hung in the air like a challenge no one could deny. The survivors looked at the human again, not with rage now, but with uncertain eyes. They had seen him bleed, seen him fight, seen him shield a child. Not prey, but as family. The old leader clenched his jaw, but even he could not speak against the truth of what they had witnessed. The widow dropped back to her knees, cradling the human's head in her lap. She whispered softly, "Please, stay alive. You gave us hope. You gave us more than anyone else." Her child's tears fell freely, his small voice trembling. "You can't leave. You promised to keep us safe." The human stirred faintly, his lips moving, though his words were broken in his own language. The widow understood the meaning in her heart. He was saying, "I promised, and I will keep it as long as I can." With one final effort, he pressed the boy's small hand into his own. The widow saw it then, not the bond of predator and prey, but of protector and family. The boy clung to him, whispering again and again, "Protector, protector, protector," as if the word itself could keep him alive. The human closed his eyes not in defeat, but in peace. His chest rose weakly but did not still. He lived, though on the edge of death, and in that fragile breath his promise remained. The widow lifted her head, her voice ringing across the broken clearing. "From this day, let no one call humans monsters in my presence. He has shown us the truth. He is not a devourer. He is our shield, and I will not allow his sacrifice to be forgotten." The crowd stood silent, their fear shaken, their hearts touched by what they had seen. Some lowered their weapons, others bowed their heads. The child's innocent faith had broken through walls built by centuries of lies. That night, under the broken stars, the survivors gathered around a small fire. The human lay resting, his wounds bandaged by trembling alien hands. The same people who once wished him dead. The widow sat beside him, her child asleep against her shoulder. Her eyes were tired but no longer filled with only fear. For now she carried something new. Trust, fragile but real, and hope, fragile but alive. She looked at the human's face, pale but peaceful, and whispered a vow of her own. "You protected us when no one else would. Now I promise you, we will protect you too." The child stirred in his sleep, his voice soft as a dream. "Protector." The word carried into the night, and for the first time the widow believed it fully. The galaxy may still whisper that humans were meat-eaters, monsters, predators, but for her and her child, one human had proven otherwise. He had become, more than a savior, he had become family. And so, in the ashes of war, a new story was born, not of monsters, but of guardians, not of fear, but of promises kept, and it would spread. Whispered first by a widow, then by a child, and then by all who had seen the truth with their own eyes, that sometimes the most feared creatures carried the greatest kindness, and sometimes a promise made in blood and pain became the bond that changed everything.